Julie here with Sirius Dallas Moon, and the moon is applying to square Pluto from Taurus, its sign of exaltation, and Venus, ruler of the moon, is 1 degree Sagittarius. We are going to have a build-up in December where all the planets that we have here, which is Mars, Sun, Venus, Mercury, going through Sagittarius and coming to square Saturn and Neptune. This is before they will all ingress into Capricorn and then Aquarius and be ruled by Saturn for at least 2 months. Now, Mars is already in orb with squaring with Saturn and Neptune. And Saturn sextiles Pluto. So, I'll begin with the Saturn sextile Pluto, which is the bigger orb. Saturn sextile in Pluto is a fantastic, excellent time to refine, remediate, get to the core of any hard aspect between Saturn and Pluto that we may have in our natal charts and or our synastries, okay? Our relationships with others. For example, for me, the Saturn sextile Pluto has been a eureka about the fact that since birth I have been juxtaposed into synastries of Saturn squaring Pluto. Okay, what I call the Corvin-out. The Corvin-out is with the Moon Uranus radical acceptance. And that Saturn and Pluto are co-present in the same sign for me. So both containing basically, traditionally, hard aspects between Saturn and Pluto. And it's not that the easy aspects are easy, okay? But it's definitely been a moment where I was like, wait a second. I grew up with a parent where it had a synastry of Saturn square Pluto. Then the next person I would spend significant amount of my life living, cohabiting with, will have his Saturn square in my Pluto. Then I do the synastry of the Corvin-out. I have a Saturn conjoining Pluto with certain people. And then, the person has a natally Saturn opposing Pluto. Is going through the second Saturn square, and Saturn position. And I'm like, wait a fucking second, what the heck is up? And even the people that I had Saturn sextile Pluto with in the synastry, the composite would make it a Saturn square. So, and that even includes people of the generation of Annika Lucas, okay, which were born in the early 60s, and and they definitely do bring the Saturn sextile. With the composite is Saturn square. So what is up with the Saturn square Pluto in my life, and the fact that my transit of Saturn square Pluto transiting my Saturn, would be Pluto out of bounds. That would also square my Sun. So it's kind of like my entire life is preparing me for the structural changes and purgatories. So when the Pluto that is out of bounds squares my Saturn, I'm ready. And that is since birth. I did not spend a single year in my life without the Saturn square Pluto in the composite or synastry. Okay? Which is an entire life. Remember when I talked about the Corvin-out, which was the relation between Peter R. de Vries and Corvin-out, that both had Saturn square Pluto natally, and they met during their Saturn return. So, um, so this is an issue that is a very big deal. Okay, wherever I go, even the people that were born in the beginning of the 60s, they have their Saturn, they have their Pluto applying to sextile my Saturn. This is the remediation. The composite is Saturn square Pluto. so so this is because it's Saturn takes 28 years to surround the zodiac, and Pluto 248. So that is so this is planets that are generational, and it was easy to see how, goddamn, there's no way where I'm not in a Saturn Pluto hard aspect, including, like, not only is it in my natal chart, I meet it everywhere I go in hard aspects as well. So it makes a lot of sense, since if I am to live through Pluto out of bounds, okay, Pluto that plays only to the interest of Pluto, ruled by Saturn, because it will be from Aquarius, squaring my Saturn, then those things are preparing me to encounter this transit. It's a telos where, hey, if I'm going to live to 50, midway into that, right about my Uranus opposition, I'm going to have Pluto out of bounds squaring my Saturn. It's one of the hardest aspects that one could experience in life. Okay, that's um, it's changing it's changing the core of the structure of something in our lives. And yeah, and the funny thing is that the Saturn opposing Pluto chart was with Saturn in my first house and Pluto in my seventh. So a lot of emphasis on the connection between interpersonal relation, one-to-one relation, and the structure of particularly confined, okay, um, places. And confined place can be the household. Confined place can be um, a city or a village. Yeah. And by the way, my own Pluto square, out of bounds Pluto square Saturn, is going to be right after the Saturn Uranus. That is going to be within less of a decade. The Saturn Uranus conjunction in Gemini, okay, the digital prisons being purged, is going to be around that time. So definitely it will have something to do with something that my grandfather experienced, which was breaking the walls of the ghetto. Whether, whether from within or from the outside, because Pluto is the outside, Saturn is within. So it will have to do with breaking the walls of the ghetto. That at first begins like a lovely city where people, play piano in the opening gate, and so for many people that are coming to this Saturn sextile Pluto, the opening sextile of Pluto, which would come to square from Taurus, um, and those that have Saturn Taurus, hello there. Oh, those that have Saturn Taurus are experiencing Pluto squaring their Saturn right now. I think a lot of them are already Gen Zers, and these are the people that outgrow regimes. Okay, so you think about the people that go out there with the skulls and bones flag, by the way. Outthrowing regimes. I don't know what they're outthrowing there, but they're definitely outthrowing structures that are set in stone, like democracy. Without actually tending to the extortion cult. And yet they are outthrowing the current misaligned form of democracy, or misaligned form, like the democracy that is not representative. Okay, that is representative of the lobbyers, yet funded by the you know the oil company, the skulls and bones. Now, this is one gigantic square because there's a tremendous amount of power to outthrow a certain structure that's traditional, and Pluto is already out of bounds. So this is the first generation that experiences the Pluto-Saturn square. Those that have Saturn in the beginning of Scorpio, by the way, like the Bilderberg and Belsen, okay, they have Saturn 3 degrees, I think 3 degrees Scorpio, or 1 degree Scorpio, and right now all of the all of the things are being, exposed. um, Particularly the psychosexual, okay, issues to do with those things, um, and the fact that the skulls and bones are not just funding the outthrowing of governments; they're funding the outthrowing of governments led by and infiltrated by the skulls and bones, which is associated with the Bilderberg, and okay, there's an innate internal structure there. There's transforming from the core, by and large, and okay, because all of these people are funded, their production, their and Pluto is cells rejuvenation. Their breeding was funded to serve a certain goal, and now they're kind of being disposed of. Some of them is a crisis of growth, some of them is not. Okay, there are things going on there. Well, the Saturn Tauruses, some of them have Saturn opposing Pluto natally, or at least those are the Saturns that would oppose the Pluto. No, some of them are having Saturn square Pluto natally, because they would be the first Pluto Capricorns, I think. And their Saturns are opposing my Pluto, and which is an interesting juxtaposition. If I recall in card here, I have with the present Saturn square Pluto, Saturn opposing my Pluto. They have Uranus in Aquarius, and this was around my Pluto square, where I was like figuring out that, hey, that person could be my younger brother or something. Like, and I was like, and there we were not arguing but conversing about things to do with the Me Too and organizations, and they were becoming a head of an organization, so they had to tend to these things, and I'm way older than them, but traumatized by that topic, and they're serving as a head of an organization, which is a sensitive position that could be, and yet in age they are way younger. So there was kind of like, wait a second, how do I even address that? Um, because I'm the older person now, and they are in the head of organization. If they don't get that right, they are the offender towards people in that organization, and yet I have to also be the grown adult with them, and that was um, okay. That was a very big conversation, and and that component was rather hidden because it's kind of like not playing into ageism or asking people about what their age is and so on and so forth. But here, that one really mattered. Like this is a real gap. This is a real age gap that um, that was of high importance. And I was like, wait a second. And that happened around my Pluto square. And I was like, wait a second. There I am, traumatized from all these things that happen in organizations. There's a person that's way younger than me, with all the implications, okay, with all the transferences that may entail. Um, I'm the grown adult here, and they're in a position that is head of an organization where if they don't get that thing right, they will be the offender, or they will support offenders. And that was um, kind of how Saturn and Pluto are about changing structures that are both internal. Saturn is about going within, traditional, to do with generations and intergenerations, and to do with immense trauma, which is Pluto. Pluto squares after Saturn matures, which is a good thing. but it also means that we spend the beginning of the first 4 decades of our lives, um, except for the Pluto Libras that they began to square at like 38 or something. Um, and people spend and a Pluto Scorpius where it moves fast, but um, the first 4 decades of our life we spend overwhelmed by power being subjugating towards us by people that are overwhelmed by power and feel that we are the subjugators. Okay, and the structure of power. I remember I ran into that during the Me Too. I had my difficulty of communication because the offenses affect the ability to speak, and that's by design. They're meant to shadow a person. But then there was social media, and then there was a place where that there was a kind of like, I didn't intend that as a point of power over, but that was also not a balanced situation in and of itself, and the different structural layers had to be, because social media was the only outlet where the entire juristic system globally, economic system globally, financial system globally is caught up by these people that are running an extortion cult. And yet social media was something that they haven't tackled yet, or that they haven't tackled in that particular fashion yet. And it was also not about a power win and lose. It is, a lot of these people only speak in power where it's about expression and healing and recovery and connection. In a world where every single thing that comes the approximation of loving was a bait to get information and assassinate, get information, extort, kill. And it would be children that would be tortured to later tackle the tortured children. Okay, it would not work it would not work on untortured children. Okay, they had to create the pedophiles first. It's not just like vouching for the pedophiles in society. Um, no, 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 no. They grew up in death camps. They would not get the pedophiles in society. They would be used when you need to litigate someone, and they would be used so that it would not be fully normalized. Otherwise, they cannot be extortion. Okay, this is where I perhaps disagree with Anneke Lucas. Okay, they grew the pedophiles, they inbreeded the pedophiles. Okay, there's the cloning project, and they grew up in an environment where where somebody described it once as evil was the currency. But it was not just the currency, it was also, and I personally ran into that when I did political assassination prevention. It's like if something would be exposed about someone that is malefic, sometimes I would get, it was almost like the other person was kind of trying to brag about something evil that they did, because that's the emotional currency. And tending to political assassination prevention was a form of caretaking. And so that's the form of caretaking that they knew. It's like, hey, but I did that. It's that evil. It's kind of like, no, 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 no. No. Okay, think about the cat that's bringing a dead bird because it it wants to pray for its owner. It's kind of like, hey, but I did that evil thing, and they're like, it was like that. We're trying to not get you assassinated now. Where an entire life was spent living in a certain way, and there was shit ton of torture involved. So, and the praise came only with the evil. Like there's a shit ton of energy invested in making people evil, that may both retrieve the faith in humanity and not like, but that's something that when we talk about the Saturn Pluto, it's changing hidden structures. And with Pluto's sextile Neptune, which leads me to the Saturn Neptune, because we also have the Neptune squares of the Neptune Capricorn, which are ruled by Saturn. This is also about hidden structures that we are not even conscious of. It is even structures in the ether. I was watching a video about the aurora and the mystery of the Arctic now that the entire world is moving arctwise. and, and haven't the Sami people suffered enough? Um, but this is the Sami survived the Vikings, so just a reminder for humanity. The Sami survived the Vikings. The Inuit survived all of the world. So those that want to take over the world, I think they should. I think the best tactic is to befriend and honor rather than to try to overthrow. It's just, um, so, um, and I'm speaking in power-oriented language because it's relevant to the power-oriented people that want to, that eye the Arctic in order to have global control. That's probably how humanity collapsed previously. In previous chapters, Mayans, the Aztecs did it, all of them collapsed, and yet everybody tries to be like the Mayans and the Aztecs. So, but I saw a video about the aurora lights, and the people, the First Nations of the Arctic, um, tell the fact that they believe those are the souls of the people that died a violent death. And I'm probably misaligning a shit ton of things because I'm not local, so pardon me. um, But you can go. Actually, I'm going to show you the video um, that that exposed me to that, and that would be what's happening with the Arctic, the mysteries of the Arctic. 4 hours of Arctic mysteries science can't explain. Its unknown echoes um, on YouTube. So what they discovered is that the aurora lights immediately respond to the presence of people in the Arctic. Now, of course, I have to try it in person, but this shows that the aurora lights are behaving more like forms of communication than a natural phenomena, and which kind of scientifically, the best, if I take a look at the testimonies of the natives, so from a scientific perspective, um, the paradigm that covers the data best is the testimonies of the First Nations, which probably means that to interpret them, we kind of need these people. Now, the way I know Nazis is they tend to try to disconnect people from that very essence. But I also consider the fact that the Arctic became icy, which means that the world became polar due to that disconnect. Okay, so the things that people like Annika Lucas is talking and interviewing people in our podcast also have to do with climate change, and the real climate improvement has to do. Um, my prediction is with Sedna, because Sedna is the closest to the ice ages, and Sedna's story was that she was trafficked supposedly for her father to have powers or unusual powers, um, and that father later severely regretted that, and it kind of reminds us of both the satanic contracts, certain aspects in Viking esoterics, where Vikings are honest about the pagan rituals they did with virgins, and that was the inspiration to satanic ritual abuses we know today under all three religions, monotheistic churches. So and and this creates a combination where Sedna definitely brings erotic intelligence. The closest to erotic intelligence is Neptune. Neptune is closest to unconditional love because we have to surrender our longing and be with the void in a place of unconditional love. And that's shit fuck erotic because it dissolves everything that is in the way of the union that we don't know how to predict it would look or feel or whatnot, and it carries an undertone of miraculous healing. Now, here is the problem: Neptune also rules drugs, and the imagery of that is what they could juxtapose psychedelics, pedophiles, and children to make them feel like that is the unconditional love. And because they would, because of the torture, they would have the transmittance of that where the child would be supposedly programmed to accept the unaccepted part of the adult, which is the inner child that was tortured and can sometimes be sadistic towards the child. And outside, we have a picture of a grown person raping a child. Inside, the feeling is of acceptance, unconditional love, and union, that where a shit ton of drugs is used to allow the dissolution of the boundaries and the dissolution of shame that later, of course, catches up, because that's all meant to be creating a moment of unabashed, unshamed, free and safe illusion that later is used as the bait in the extortion code, where the child is programmed to dissociation to place the adult next to the camera and with a shit ton of drugs to create that illusion that the child, even depending on the situation, is supposed to participate in, and make the adult feel comfortable about raping them. Whereas the child is going through torture sometimes, and some, like, there is a dissociation level. So um, as a person that experienced something close to that with my ex-psychologist, where the desire was to have an enjoyable experience, or my desire in the situation was to have an enjoyable experience, and very likely there was something there that played to my trauma that would be used um, to extort him in the astral, because it would be visible in the astral. But I was not the extorting party. And he was supposed to program me to into or back into this type of extortion cults programming. It was all happening in the astral, and he was trying to decide for me about my eroticism, which I didn't like, and I actually used mint essential oil to negate that. And there was a use of something to do with psychosis, a psychosis inducing drugs or psychosis states of consciousness. And I saw something to do with the rainbow. He was trying to access my heart, and I saw something to do with the rainbow. And I know it has to do with some sort of programming, but it felt like it was his programming. And yet I was viewing him from, like, from a depersonalization point. And then another health profession that I told that to, that was really interested in my story, because I'm also a researcher, then later he would be taken away from, he would be used, he would also be programmed and tortured to try to bring me into some sort of of an extortion, trafficking ring cult. And it was all happening in the astral. But then there was a real attempt to kidnap me, um, that I had to escape. And that was all after I was researching the body mind question and the politics of the senses. And I ran into the research. It was nothing, it was not even innovation of mine, it was existing research. And again, I'm getting Terence McKenna consciousness. But basically, there was the research was about the fact that trauma causes dissociation, and it causes access to senses that the extrasensory, but it's not the way to access the extrasensory, and we do not need trauma to access the extrasensory. Um, Terence McKenna research saw that the use of MDMA can dissolve a lot of the inhibition that people would have around who they have intercourse with, and that would be including children. And so the use of that in those settings was to create the situation of rape of children, to later create the situation of extortion and bind people into believing that they need to normalize sex with children rather than to address what underlies extortion codes so that that can be dissolved. It is not surprising that Saturn is ruling an out-of-bound Pluto in Aquarius about to commit Neptune when we talk about that. So, and with the pressure cooker of um, the extinguishing of humanity, and the extinguishing of humanity is done by creating a perpetual war state. I want you to watch a video guided by a black cat, and this is by last 7 days, how to survive the first 7 days of war. Excellent video that describes how that when you watch that video, you understand how each and every instinct, particularly empathy, and this is how we would get people like Elon Musk that lived through that perpetual war state, saying that the most weakness of humanity is empathy, and this is coming from a perpetual war state where every notion of empathy can kill someone. Probably why my grandfather only spoke once about the Second World War and never again. Um, and so I understood immediately that the people within these places are simply going through a Holocaust, and it is by design to extinguish the humanity in them. People are really honing on the cloning, and we can create. We have cows used to eat people. Okay, there are people that befriend bears, and that like that's not even the issue. The bigger issue is, okay, it is the issue about learning how to work with a certain predator type. But again, cows used to eat people. We have freedom farms today. So, okay, so that is something to keep in mind, that it was the perpetual war state that extinguished humanity, where people had to eat people. And it's not, and they're put in that perpetual war. And now we think about perpetual war state as, oh, you will have no love, you will have no this. No, 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 no. It's perpetual war state juxtaposed with meeting their needs, with meeting their innermost needs. And Annika Lucas addressed that the people that met the needs, the emotional needs that are necessary to growth. Okay, and I have undergone that in 2019 particularly, but also 2020. Which was, there would be juxtaposed people that meet their innermost needs. Okay, whether it is a hug, or the caretaking, or even the love that is not erotic, or okay, then the need of a child to grow in order to keep people completely under control. And then there's a fine line that crosses the threshold, and people begin to want and ask and demand a love that is actually loving. So it begin to be a point of manifestation of a love that is actually loving, that can revive the Arctic. And what do I mean by that is that a love that is actually loving is meeting our non-erotic needs, and eventually our erotic needs, in a way that is safe and free and honoring of our sovereignty of the soul and the uniqueness that expresses itself through each and every part of the collective. This is why we have withdrawn consent. This is why Neptune is the epitome of eroticism, because we have to surrender being able to be erotically with that person, even if that person is our spouse for so and so years and we have so and so children with them. And in the world where we have that, the world is not polar, okay? Which means that the Arctic is not masses upon masses of snow, but very lively, and I'm talking forest lively. Okay, remember when I first ordered um, a talisman that came from the fallen antler bone, and the first thing that I saw was overwhelming love, overwhelming love. And before I ordered that, there was a desire to, I was, I guess, naturally connecting with the spirits of the children that committed the jump from buildings because they were bullied, and many more things, and the aspiration to the love that is beyond this. And that was a form of overwhelming love. And if we take a look at the reindeers particularly, the connection is so deep because the people, the only meat there is the caribou and the fish meat, and that's freaking cold, so that's freaking necessary to eat that, and yet the close connection that now expresses itself through sacrifice, but in a place where we do have this honoring, okay, honoring of eroticism in a way that does not violate innocence, then what the antler bone showed me was the camels becoming the, because I talked about the camels not being really a desert animal, but what the antlers showed me is the moss, okay, that's growing, because they eat moss, and they showed me the moss growing on the trees, and this is the trees were looking like the antlers, like, okay, and the moss was growing on them because this would be what the antlers would eat, what the reindeers would eat, and they were showing me that, um, and that had to do with seeing eroticism or with embedding sacrifice in eroticism, and the love that I was receiving was such an overwhelming love, and then the message that I received was no amount of love justifies rape. and and that to me connects with the Sedna story. Um, so this is something that was my own experience, um, of overwhelming love, and I never met reindeer in my life. So there was something just so overwhelmingly loving in that. Um, yeah, and very immediate. That is a person who's never been there. Okay, I cannot say that this is, even if there is some DNA, it would be probably so diluted. Um, but that was such an immediate experience that I really had to share the gnosis because it's very relevant for, if we ask ourselves, what is good for the Arctic, or what does the Arctic soil wants? What is the Arctic region longing to be? And that could be a clue, um, because longing has both time and space sense of isolation. And I guess while my North Node is in the Arctic region, it's also in my fourth house of origin and upbringing, and this is on a soul level type of thing. Okay, so this is an energy or an etheric framework from which to discuss now that the moon is applying to sextile Neptune. Nay, no, it's not sextile Neptune. Just, yeah. Oh, Venus is trining Neptune. Venus is still trining Neptune from Sagittarius. And within that framework of unconditional love, and the mystery of it all, it's a fantastic framework to think about and to hold energetically when we discuss the transits of um, Saturn Mars, Saturn Sun. Okay, Saturn Sun, you think about the teeth, the wisdom teeth. Most of us don't have or have our wisdom teeth in poor state. The wisdom teeth are to do with the heart. Okay, and think about the fact that most of us, the structure of our jaw is even not accommodating to maintain a wisdom teeth. And think about the structural changes, Saturn Pluto, that will benefit our wisdom teeth, which is our heart and ancestry. Okay, so the heart connection. And how that shows up, it shows up as mold. It shows up as, our teeth becoming its darker color, and it could show up as inflammation. And inflammation has to do with the sovereign, with the I am, which is Aries, and Sun is exalting Aries. So we have ancestors upon ancestors that weren't allowed to be who they are and maintain also their erotic, their sexual sovereignty, because of traditions that were uh, the tradition of marrying young children, okay, young women, but also internally in secret societies, the boy marriages, okay. Those traditions have affected the structure of our jaw to such where the wisdom teeth that are connecting with the heart their structure becomes moldy, because it's basically we have moldified our heart, and we know that problems with our teeth, they go through the arteries to our heart and create heart attacks. So this is something to change, to revive and refine the structure of our teeth. Probably also our bone marrow. I am not too acquainted with that. Um, but this is where ending Saturn child marriages, marriage Saturn, and transforming that structure, Pluto Saturn, is appeasing to basically evacuating the mold from the wisdom teeth. And then that would change the structure. Okay, the Pluto, actually the Pluto Capricorn generation, they do the mewing thingy, which is using the tongue to reshape the jaw. And it takes a lot of time, Saturn. Okay? Um, so we already have the generation working on that, and then we just need to remove the obstacles. And that is what the Saturn Pluto is doing. And this is where the Sun Saturn, many of us that have been born with Sun, have always been surrounded with Sun Saturn heart aspect. There would also be the supportive aspect, okay? Okay, and it's not just, for example, the Virgo souls in my life have their Sun sextiling my Saturn. Um, So that is, yes, unfortunately, I have my son flying to square their Saturn sometimes, but their sun is sextile in my Saturn. Um, and so when we remove, and actually they do talk about child marriages needing to end in regarding to certain religion, but this is also where um, that would be evacuating the mold from the teeth, but also from the heart. Think about the fact that almost the number one medical cause of death is heart diseases, and that there's no there when we do medicine holistically, and now the new structures of hospitals are meant to access both physical and mental health. When we do that holistically, we can't avoid the fact that heart health is heart health. Okay, and that's to do with the heart, and how the structure of marriages affected heart health. um, let's talk about Mars. Mars would be the inflammation around the wisdom teeth, the inflammation in our gum, the blood. It would also be the blood that would guide the disease from the teeth to the heart. What the role of Mars is to act in favor of what is right. And in some cases, that means death. Mars is where we take action. And taking action to reduce inflammation is taking the actions to change the structure. It's the simple notion of, Father, do I have to kill you? Do I have to unalive you so that my brother or sister wouldn't unalive themselves? So that my mother wouldn't unalive herself? Do I really have to pick between your life and my other siblings? Because that was the structure of the ghetto, the structure of the mafia, the structure of the oppressors. Why do we have to internalize this structure if in our family, in our tribe, in our society, in our nations? In our academic studies, in our scientific institutions, in everything that have a certification, when we come to cross borders or renew a passport. And by the way, yes, I had gone through a certain type of violation of my boundaries upon renewing of my very passport. I had to fight violation as I was going through to get that passport done. I wasn't agreeing to anything. It wasn't somebody put an ultimatum, you have to do this, you have to. I disagreed with the ultimatum. And then there was tremendous attempts to use sexual boundary violation in order to make me not be able to have a passport. Does this nation have to be invaded, crumbled, and extinguished to the core before the citizens are actually safe and free? Mars Saturn squares are about the crisis is a structural crisis, and Mars is taking action to change the structure. Now, here's the thing: Saturn knows what needs to be changed. Mars needs that changed yesterday. Now, Saturn can be so Saturnian that he thinks that to sleep with a 12-year-old child is okay. Okay, like Ehud Barak. Ehud Barak has a speech impairment. I do believe that that speech impairment has to do with him being ritually abused as a child. And yet, when he was caught up in the Epsteins, he said, yes, he did sleep with a 12, 13 years old, but he doesn't think that this is wrong. Ehud Barak was a prime minister in Israel. He took us out of Lebanon. Some people say good thing, bad thing, who knows. For the families of the soldiers that were in Lebanon, I think they were happy to have their children back. Oh, wait a second. Did I just mention children? Now, it may be that it didn't take us out of there are many things where we would be marketed a certain scene where the actual security condition is different. Um, um, and then let's talk about Venus Saturn. And Venus Saturn, where I already began to discuss in another video, is about values. And here we have to remember that Venus represents the values, because Saturn criticizes the value of Venus, but Venus is the value. Okay? So let's say Venus is in Sagittarius now. If the value is of freedom, let's say Sagittarius can be, I'm not talking about the Pluto Sag. Okay, Gen Zers, you're not going to understand that, okay? But before Gen Zers, before Pluto ingressed into Sagittarius, Sagittarius was considered a highly non-monogamous sign because the value of Venus in Sag was freedom. Okay? Now, of course, if this Venus is trining Saturn, or then that can be different, but Venus in Sagittarius, her value of truth is freedom. So it's more important if she is sexually free than if she's married or not married. Okay? It's also Venus in Jupiter sign. In the best of cases, that would be the high school sweethearts that became a couple and kind of like still through the years is having, because it's the two benevolence meeting. Pluto Sag will not understand that. I know that. But maybe some of them. But Pluto Sag is known to be possessive. And it's like, why are Sagittarians so possessive? Like, do they have a Pluto in Sagittarius? Probably they do. I'm not talking about Sun in Sagittarius with Pluto in Scorpio. In fact, the Pluto in Scorpio can be so intensely imbued in relationships that it understands how it could undermine itself and then might even choose to not hone in on being monogamous, therefore. Or it can be extremely monogamous. Like there, Pluto does go to extremes here. So, um, For example, I have Mars in Scorpio. For me, it's more important something is aligned on and honoring on the body, heart, mind, and soul than if and what is in that.